say shalom, 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 and good evening to all 12 tribes of Yasha'al, to the whole house, the whole Bayif of Yasha'al, all 12 tribes, worldwide, wherever your feet are touching the soil on this evening, on this La'ilah. To the elder Ak, Yahuda, that is to say the elder brother, Yahuda, to the younger brother, Ephraim, Ephraim, to the former stranger, the former Gentile, the former foreigner who was formerly estranged from the everlasting covenant, but having been re-engrafted into the tree of life, which is by extension the olive tree, through the branch who is, which is to say Ha-Natsah, who is Yahushua HaMashiach, whereby now becoming Nazarene branches, and whereby now being privy to the same everlasting covenant and promise and inheritance that was given to Yasha'al and to Yasha'al alone. Good evening to you. Peace and blessings. Shalom and barak'u to all 12 tribes, wherever your feet are touching the soil, and the strangers who are adjoined to us. Wherever your feet are touching the soil on this La'ilah, which is to say evening, shalom to you. Shalom. Once again, we thank you for those of you who are on YouTube who will watch this teaching later on. We are grateful that you are joining Yahuwah's Remnant, Yahuwah's Remnant Midweek Gathering. Once again, I am Daoud Ban Yahuwah. This is my Aisha, which is to say wife, Asher Yah, Barak Yahuwah, Barak Yahuwah, Barak Yahuwah. Mashpaka, without any delay, Yahuwah wants to speak to us tonight, if you're taking notes, about the two minds of men. The two minds of men, M-I-N-D-S, the two minds of men. He's been speaking to us about two manner of men. Either you're born from above or you're born from below. Either you are firstborn according to the Ruach or you are firstborn according to the flesh. This night, he wants to speak to us from the subject, the two minds of men. The two minds of men. My beloved son, he mentioned earlier regarding how he texted me yesterday and reached out to me, and I was grateful for that text. And in that text, he asked how my wife and I were doing. And being truthfully, I responded to him that we were doing well. On that particular day, we were fighting the good fight, but on the previous day, I had somewhat of a battle. The previous day was kind of rough. But in that conversation, in that same conversation, I shared with him that in the battle of this flesh, in this affliction, in this current affliction, let's just be transparent. In this current affliction that I'm in, that Abba has shown me something. And as his son, as his obedient son, I am inclined to obey. But what he told me, what he whispered to me is that even in affliction, I still have to put others before myself. I still must put others before myself. And Mishpaka, the only way to do this is to have the mind of the Ruach. Because the mind of the flesh, we're talking about the two minds of men. And by the way, that is the mind of the flesh and the mind of the Ruach. The mind of the flesh and the mind of the Ruach. The mind of the flesh does not want to do this. The mind of the flesh cannot do this. It cannot do this. The mind of the flesh cannot and will not put others before itself. It cannot. But what Abba wants you to understand, Mashpaka, what he wants you to understand is that there are indeed two minds. Literally, there are two minds. There is the mind of the flesh, and there is the mind of the Ruach. These are separate and distinct. The mind of the Ruach is separate from the flesh. I pray you're getting this. The mind of the Ruach is separate from the flesh. It has nothing to do with the flesh. The flesh, listen, the flesh has a mind of its own. It literally has a mind of its own. It has its own will, and it wants to do what it wants to do. It literally has a mind of its own. It literally has a mind of its own. A few weeks ago, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, as my Aisha and I, we were praising Abba, and we were entering in. We were going in. We were going beyond the veil. Indeed, we now have access to go beyond the veil, because we do not serve a high Kahan, a Kahan Gadol, a high priest, who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one whom in which was tempted just as we are, yet remained without sin. So now let us boldly come before the throne of favor during our time of need, that we may obtain compassion. We may freely come now and go beyond the veil. So as we were praising and we were entering in, and as we were going beyond the veil, the Master spoke to us, and we fell to our knees, and I uttered a word, but he said, silence. He said, silence. He said, you are in the throne room. You are in the throne room. Even though we were still here physically in our flesh, the Ruach was in the throne room. I need you to get this. The Ruach was in the throne room. Why is this important, you ask me? Because some struggle with this dynamic. They struggle with it. They don't understand that the flesh has a mind of its own, and there is a mind of the Ruach that is in direct contrast with it. And so there are occasions when you may be praising or you may be praying and your flesh is speaking to you. You still have those lustful thoughts. You still have those thoughts of promiscuity, or if you're struggling with masturbation, or if you're struggling with issues of anger, or if you're struggling with issues of pride, or if you are struggling with issues of selfishness, your flesh is constantly speaking to you. Constantly speaking to you. And some may think, well, because my flesh is constantly speaking to me this way, that Yahuwah is not with me. That I am not born from above, because I'm hearing these issues. I'm having these thoughts in my flesh. That's not so. That's not so. Do you not understand that Yahusha is our Pasach lamb that is delivering us from Egypt? What is Egypt? Egypt is the flesh. Egypt is the bondage of the flesh. He is the Pasach lamb, and the operative word is delivering, who is delivering us from crime, who is delivering us from sin, who is delivering us from the bondage of the flesh. And until we are delivered from the bondage of the flesh, there is a dual nature. There is the mind of the flesh and the mind of the Ruach. There are two different minds. Those who are the first fruits of the first fruits, listen, are going to be the first to be completely delivered from what? From the flesh. Yes, from Hashatan, who is the master of the flesh. Those who are the first fruits of the first fruits, who have received the Ruach HaKadosh, who is the seal of redemption. He is the seal of redemption. He is a down payment, a foreshadowing of us being redeemed. Redeemed from what, you might ask? Redeemed from the flesh. Redeemed from the flesh. And so there is a dual nature. The mind of the flesh has a mind of its own. It has a mind of its own. And if we adhere to the mind of the flesh, as the text declares, we're going to die. Because the mind of the flesh is what? It's enmity between Yahuwah and us. I pray you understand that you're getting this, that there are two separate minds. And just because these thoughts These thoughts are going off in your head. These thoughts, which are temptations, which are trying to cause you to fall into crime and to fall into sin, does not mean that you do not belong to Yahuwah. We are dual citizens. As the wind blows, and goes where it wants to go, and no one knows where it came from, or no one knows where it's going, so is the mind of the Ruach. Do you hear? So is the mind of the Ruach. This is how we were physically here on earth in our bodies bowed before him. And in the Ruach, he said, hush, you are in the throne room. You are in the throne room. And so the battle then becomes with either ignoring the flesh, ignoring the thoughts. Just ignore them. Ignore them completely. And if you can't ignore them, then rebuke them. Rebuke them, because they are demons. They are demons trying to speak to you, trying to tempt you. Because why? Because the flesh belongs to them. Because the flesh belongs to Hashatan. Yes, it does. We are sold under crime. We are sold into bondage. We have been sold into captivity. We have been sold into sin because Adam, our father, sold us to him. And so until we are completely delivered from this flesh, we are dual citizens. He is the master of this flesh. He is the master of it. It belongs to him. It is Egypt, and he is Pharaoh. And if you pay attention to those voices, which he doesn't, they don't have to stop. Do you understand? They don't have to stop because he legally owns the flesh. He is the legal owner of the flesh. They don't have to stop. He has a legal right to it. You see, this is about legalities. This is about legalities. And so we must ignore it. We must understand that it has a mind of its own. A mind of its own. And the Ruach has a mind of its own. It goes where it pleases. And no one knows where it goes or what it's doing. No one knows. It has a mind of its own. And the mind of the Ruach is life and shalom. The mind of the Ruach is righteousness and shalom. Its mind is fixed on righteousness. Its mind is fixed on truth. And this is where we who have the Ruach must remain. We must remain in the Ruach. We must ignore those voices in the flesh, understanding that it truly has a mind of its own. It truly has a mind of its own, and it truly has its own desires. Reading now.
We have John, 3rd chapter.
Reading from John, the 3rd chapter. If you want to take notes, if you want to turn to these chapters, go ahead and turn to them. But we want to move fairly quickly because I know a lot of you have to go to work tomorrow, but we're just going to allow the Ruach to speak. But prayerfully, we won't be too long. But turning now to the 3rd chapter of John. YAHUAH'S, the 3rd chapter. Turning to the 3rd chapter of John. Many struggle with these thoughts. They think that they're filthy. And it brings about guilt. It brings about condemnation because you're still having these thoughts and you're asking these questions as to why I still have these thoughts. And because you still have these thoughts, it brings about a guilt and a heaviness and a condemnation which doesn't come from Yahuwah. And many who operate in this guilt and this condemnation do not understand that the flesh indeed has a mind of its own, and it's going to continue to speak to you. It's going to continue to speak, but you must be strong enough in the Ruach to either ignore the voices of the flesh or rebuke those voices in the name of Yahuwah, in the name of Yahushua HaMashiach, Barak Yahuwah. So looking now at John chapter 3, YAHUAH'S in chapter 3, we're going to read verses 1
through 8.
1 through 8. John chapter 3, YAHUAH'S in chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. Beginning at verse 1, we read here.
And there was a man of the Pharisees. Nachduman was his name.
Yes.
A ruler of the Yahudim.
Yes.
This one came to Yahushua by night.
Yes.
And said to him, Rabbi, We know that you are a teacher come from Elohim.
Mm-hmm.
For no one is able to do these signs you do if Elohim is not with him.
Mm-hmm.
Yahusha answered and said to him, truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born from above, he is unable to see the reign of Elohim.
Yes.
Noctamon said to him, how is a man able to be born when he is old?
Mm-hmm.
Is he able to enter into his mother's womb a second time and be born? Yahusha answered, truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and of the Ruach, he is unable to enter into the reign of Elohim.
Mm-hmm.
That which has been born of the flesh is flesh.
Yes.
And that which has been born of the Ruach is Ruach.
Yes.
Do not marvel that I said to you, you have to be born from above.
Come on.
The wind blows where it wishes.
The wind blows where it wishes. The Ruach is what? It's wind, it's breath. And it blows where it wishes. It goes where it wishes. Again, Ruach means wind and breath. And it goes, he goes where he wishes. Read.
And you hear the sound of it, but do not know where it comes from.
But do not know where it comes from.
And where it goes.
And where it goes.
So is everyone who has been born of the Ruach.
So is everyone. So is everyone. Are you listening? So is everyone who has been born of the Ruach. You have to separate the two minds. They are separate and distinct. Separate and distinct. We are what? We are seated in heavenly places. You could be praising and worshiping Abba and be in the throne room because the Ruach goes where it wishes and we do not know where he goes. And you could be sitting in the throne room while praising him in your living room. While at the same time, while praising him and sitting in the throne room, Hashatan is speaking to the flesh, whom he has a legal right to, what he has a legal right to, giving you thoughts of promiscuity, giving you lustful thoughts, giving you thoughts of masturbation, giving you angry thoughts and thoughts of selfishness at the same time while you are seated in heavenly places. You're going to have to learn to ignore the flesh. You're going to have to learn to ignore it, understanding who it belongs to. He has a legal right to it, and he has a legal right to speak to it whenever he pleases. He has a right to speak to it because he is the master of it. He is the master of the flesh because Adam legally and freely gave it to him. So we have got to learn. We have got to learn to live in accordance with the mind of the Ruach and ignore the mind of the flesh. If you don't, listen, affliction is sent. Abba allows it. Affliction is sent. Tiredness of flesh is sent. Frustration of flesh is sent. Temptation of flesh is sent to do what? To get us out of the mind of the Ruach and into the mind of the flesh, which is death. Which is death. And if he can get us focusing on the affliction and focusing on whatever is going on in the flesh, he can steal and kill and destroy. Whether that is stealing your shalom, whether that is stealing your shalom or any other thing, or whether or not that means to steal the Ruach. Because listen, if you obey the mind of the flesh and you tempt the Ruach and you weary him, he will leave. He will leave. And so he's constantly coming to steal, to kill, and destroy. And he has a right to this. He is Pharaoh, and this is Egypt. He has a right to it. And so we've got to learn, Mispaka. We've got to learn, if you have the Ruach, you are seated in heavenly places. You are seated there with the Hamashiach. They don't believe me. Read the next one.
Ephesians 2 and 7.
Ephesians chapter 2, verses what?
2 through 7.
2 through 7. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 2 through 7. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 2 through 7. Read, little one.
And you are dead in trespasses.
And you are what?
Dead in trespasses. And crime in which you once walked according to the course of this world.
According to the course of this world.
According to the ruler of the authority of the air.
According to the ruler of the authority of the air.
of the root that is now working in the sons of disobedience,
of the root who is now working in the sons of disobedience,
among whom also we all once lived in the lust of our flesh.
say it again.
Among whom also we all once lived in the lust of our flesh.
Say it again.
Among whom also we all once lived in the lust of our flesh.
Read.
Doing the desires of the flesh and of the mind.
Read.
And were by nature children of wrath.
Read.
Also as the rest.
Mm-hmm.
But Elohim, who is rich in compassion.
But Elohim, who is rich in compassion.
Because of his great love.
Because of his great love with which he loved us.
Even when we were dead in trespasses.
Even when we were dead in trespasses.
Made us alive together with Mashiach.
Made us alive together with Mashiach.
By favor you have been saved.
By favor you have been saved. Barak Yahuwah. So now we are seated with him in heavenly places in the Shamayim, provided that you have his Ruach. And there is another mind. There is another mind that has been given to us. Another mind. We are no longer, and this is how the Son sets us free. This is how the Son, the dumb of the everlasting covenant, which is applied to the doorpost, Barak Yahuwah, sets us free from bondage, sets us free from sin, sets us free from Egypt, when we are then born from above. But that is only a foreshadowing. He is the seal of redemption, who is a foreshadowing of us completely being delivered. Being delivered from what? Being delivered from the flesh. Until we are completely delivered from the flesh, Hashatan still has a right to this. And he still has a right to speak those thoughts to us. He has a right. And we who are born from above must use discernment and understand where these thoughts are coming from, that they are in accordance with the mind of the flesh, and we must ignore them. We must not operate in guilt. We must not operate in condemnation. They are going to continue to come until we are delivered from this flesh. And the first fruits of the first fruit are going to be the first to be delivered from the flesh, and who will walk wholly in Ruach, free, completely free from bondage, completely free from Hashatan. You don't believe me? In Revelation 12, there are those who are drawn to the wilderness, who are going to be there for 3.5 years, the remnant within the remnant. And what happens? Hashatan chases them, but when he cannot overcome them, he flees from them, and he goes back to afflict the remnant of her seed for 3.5 years. And so now, if you're in the wilderness, free from Hashatan, you are now free from Egypt. You are now free from bondage. You can now walk wholly in Ruach. You can walk wholly in Ruach. And listen, for those who are first fruit, in that foreshadowing that he has given us, your space, your personal space ought to be a sanctuary. It ought to be a sanctuary. It ought to be a dwelling place unto Yahuwah. Yes, it should. It ought to be a dwelling place of Yahuwah, where no flesh dwells, where Hashatan is not allowed to enter, because he is not allowed to enter into the presence of Yahuwah. He cannot enter there. Demons cannot enter there. They cannot enter into his dwelling place. They tremble in his presence. They tremble there. And so what does he do? He tries to get us to operate in the flesh. Oftentimes he sends those who are outside. He sends those who are outside with thoughts and darts, and he seeks to cause us to go outside of this dwelling place and get into the mind of the flesh, so that he can come in and get us in the mind of the flesh. But there is no reason whatsoever that Hashatan should be in this dwelling place. No reason. We must freely give him access to this dwelling place. Freely give him access to this dwelling place. We must freely give it to him. We must freely give it to him. We must freely open a door and freely allow him to come in. We must freely do it. If Abba has separated this place, separated your dwelling, separated your home as a dwelling place unto him, we must freely give it to him. Read, little one.
Okay, I'm finishing. And raised us up together and made us sit together in the heavenlies in Mashiach Yahusha, in order to show in the coming ages the exceeding riches of his favor and kindness towards us in Mashiach Yahusha.
So we are seated in heavenly places with him. So we are seated with him in heavenly places. And we now have a new mind. And we have been given a down payment, a foreshadowing via the Ruach HaKadosh of what it will look like to walk completely in Ruach, void of the flesh. But until then, there's still the battle of this flesh. There's still the battle of this flesh that we must overcome. And we must not grow weary. We must not grow weary in this fight. We must understand that there are legalities, where these thoughts are coming from, and that these afflictions and that these thoughts are sent to us to get us into the mind of the flesh, which leads to death. Read, little one.
Romans 7 through 26.
Romans chapter 7, verse 7 through 26. Romans chapter 7, verses 7 through 26. Romans chapter 7, verses 7 through 26. I pray that there is a Christian that will listen to this video, because I can tell you when I was in Christianity, even outside of Christianity, this is something that I struggled with. And that is, if I truly belong to Yahuwah, if I'm truly born of Ruach, then why do I still have these thoughts? Why do these thoughts keep coming? Why do they keep coming? Now, here's what I will tell you. There's one thing. It's one matter for the thoughts to come, because he has a legal right to the flesh. He is Pharaoh. But there is something entirely different to give in to the thoughts that he's sending. The thoughts are not going to stop, but it becomes something entirely different when you give in to the thoughts, the arrows, the fiery arrows that are coming. And that includes indeed when affliction comes. We are commanded to what? To put others before ourselves. We are commanded to put others before ourselves. So if we are allowing the affliction to cause us to not put others before ourselves, then we are still in transgression. We are in transgression. We are to put others before ourselves no matter what. No matter the affliction, we are to put others before ourselves. Romans chapter 7, verse 7 through 26. Beginning at verse 7, read.
What then shall we say? Is the Torah a crime? Let it not be. However, I did not know crime except through the Torah. For also the covetousness I knew not, if the Torah had not said, you shall not covet. But crime, having taken the occasion through the command, did work in me all sorts of covetousness. Did work in me all sorts of covetousness. Shaul, Paul is talking here, speaking here, indeed, about the mind of the flesh and the mind of the Ruach. They're two different minds. Two different minds. And we won't be complete. We are being delivered from the flesh. We are being delivered from the mind of the flesh. We're not delivered yet. We have a down payment. And with this down payment, we no longer have to give in to the sinful desires of our flesh. But you need to understand that there are two separate minds, separate and distinct. They are separate and distinct. The mind of the Ruach has nothing to do with the flesh. Nothing to do with the thoughts of the flesh. It has nothing to do with it. Read, little one. For apart from Torah, crime is dead. And I was alive apart from the Torah once. But when the command came, the sin revived and I died. And the command which was to result in life, this I found to result in death. For crime, having taken the occasion through the command, deceived me, and through it killed me. So that the Torah truly is kadosh, and the command kadosh, and righteous and good. Therefore has that which is good become death to me? Let it not be. But that crime might be manifest, was working death in me through what is good, so that crime through the command might become an exceedingly great criminal. For we know that the Torah is ruach, but I am fleshly, sold under crime.
But I am fleshly, sold under crime, sold under sin. I told you, Adam, our father Adam sold us. He sold us into crime. He sold us into slavery. He sold us into bondage. He sold us into Egypt. He sold us to Pharaoh. He sold us to Parah, who is Hashatan. He sold us. And so now, again, Hashatan has a legal right to the flesh. The flesh is a resident of Egypt. It is a resident of Egypt, and it has a mind of its own. It has a mind of its own, and those thoughts are not going to stop. You have either got to ignore them or rebuke them. You've either got to ignore them or rebuke them, but you must overcome them. And you must understand. You must understand the legalities and we must understand the different realms and dominions and the legalities that govern them. You must understand. You must understand. And don't let the thoughts of the flesh get you down and cause you to condemn yourself and to operate in guilt. You must understand what is taking place. And you must either ignore it or rebuke it. Read, little one.
For what I work, I know not. For what I wish, that I do not practice. But what I hate, that I do.
Barak Yahuwah, the flesh, again, is a resident of Egypt. Egypt is sin, it's crime. The flesh does not want to obey Torah. The flesh wants only to do unrighteousness. And in the flesh, you will only get unrighteous thoughts. You will only get unrighteous thoughts. And this is what we must overcome. We must operate in the mind of the Ruach, provided that you have the Ruach. And you must understand that there are two different minds. Two different minds. Read, little one.
But if I do what I do not wish, I agree with the Torah that it is good. And now it is no longer I that work it, but the crime dwelling in me. For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwells no good.
There is no good. It belongs to Hashatan. This is what we're being delivered from. There is no good in it. And it's not going to speak any good to you. Don't get discouraged because of the thoughts. Don't get discouraged. Don't get discouraged because of them. Many turn away from the truth because of the thoughts. They give in to the thoughts and they think to themselves that I can't be of Yahuwah because I'm still having these thoughts. And they're not just thoughts, they're demons, they're devils that are speaking to the flesh because they have a legal right to do it. Read, little one.
For to wish is present with me, but to work the good I do not find. For the good that I wish to do, I do not do. But the evil I do not wish to do, this I practice.
He's talking about the mind of the flesh again against the mind of the Ruach. And at this juncture, he's talking about how he struggled because he operated in the flesh. This was prior to him receiving the Ruach. This was when he was operating in his flesh, trying to obey the righteous Torah, which is Ruach, which he could not do. Which he could not do because he was operating in the mind of the flesh. Read.
And if I do that which I do not wish, is it no longer I who work it, but the crime dwelling in me? I find therefore this command, that when I wish to do the good, that the evil is present with me. For I delight in the Torah of Elohim, according to the inward man. But I see another Torah in my members, battling against the Torah of my mind.
I see another Torah in my members, in my flesh, battling against the Torah of my mind. The two minds of men, the two manner of minds of men. I don't care how full of the Ruach you are. This is Shaul, who was full of the Ruach of Yahuwah. I don't care how full of the Ruach you are. The mind of the flesh is going to remain until we are delivered from the flesh. It is going to remain. And so in order to be successful in any battle, you have to understand your enemy. You have to know your enemy. And the flesh is our enemy. It belongs to Hashatan. You must understand it. You must understand that he has a legal right to it. He has a legal right to the flesh. He has a legal right to speak to it. And the mind of the flesh belongs to him. You must understand this dynamic. Read, little one.
And bringing me into captivity to the Torah of crime, which is in my members. Wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from this body of death? Thanks to Elohim through Yahushua Mashiach, our master. So then with the mind, I myself truly serve the Torah of Elohim, but with the flesh, the Torah of crime.
The two minds of men. The two minds of men. We must overcome the mind of the flesh. You must understand its genesis. We must understand where it comes from. We must understand the legalities that he legally owns the flesh because Adam gave it to him. And so he has a legal right to speak to it. And again, Yahuwah allows the afflictions. He allows the temptations in order to what? To strengthen the inner man. But Hashatan afflicts the flesh, and he sends temptations to what? To cause those of us who are born of Ruach to ignore the Ruach and to operate in accordance with the mind of the flesh, which leads to death. Romans chapter 8.
1 through 17.
Romans chapter 8, verses 1 through 17. Strengthen that inner man. Strengthen him. Strengthen him. Ignore the flesh. Ignore it. Ignore it, because the flesh seeks to steal your salvation. The flesh seeks to steal your shalom. The flesh seeks to steal. It seeks to steal, to kill, and destroy. It seeks to steal. Ignore it or rebuke it. Romans chapter 8, verses 1 through 17. Beginning at verse 1, read.
There is then now no condemnation.
There is then no condemnation.
To those who are in Mashiach Yahusha.
To those who are in Mashiach Yahusha.
Who do not walk according to the flesh.
Who do not walk according to the flesh.
But according to the Ruach.
According to the Ruach. We are now under no condemnation. If we walk according to the flesh, we are condemned. We will die, because the flesh does not want to obey the Torah. It does not want to, and it cannot obey the Torah. It does not want to submit to Yahuwah, because it has a mind of its own. It has a mind of its own, which is separate from the mind of the Ruach. Read.
For the Torah of the Ruach of the life in Mashiach Yahusha has set me free from the Torah of crime and of death.
This is how he sets us free. This is how the Son sets us free. This is how the Son sets us free from Egypt via his Ruach, when we are seated with him in heavenly places. Barak Yahuwah, read.
For the Torah being powerless in that it was weak through the flesh, Elohim having sent his own Son in the likeness of flesh of crime, and concerning crime, condemned crime in the flesh, so that the righteousness of the Torah should be completed in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Ruach. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the matters of the flesh.
There's that word mind again. Read.
But those who live according to the Ruach, the matters of the Ruach.
The matters of the Ruach.
For the mind of the flesh is death.
For the mind of the flesh is death. Read.
But the mind of the Ruach is life and shalom.
But the mind of the Ruach is life and shalom. The two minds of men. There are two minds that are separate and distinct. And you are going to have to learn to distinguish the two minds. You're going to have to learn to distinguish them. You're going to have to learn that the flesh has a mind of its own, and it will speak things to you in accordance to the flesh, even when you're praising, even when you're praying, even when you're seeking to do the matters of Yahuwah. It will speak to you, and it will cause you to feel guilt even when you're doing something good, if you give in to it. If you don't know the game that's being played, if you don't know the dynamic that is at work, that the flesh belongs to Hashatan. It belongs to him. He is the master of it. And it's going to speak. It's going to speak to you irrespective of whether or not you want it to speak to you or not. You must either ignore it or rebuke it. Read, little one.
Because the mind of the flesh is enmity towards Elohim.
It is his enemy. Read.
For it does not subject itself to the Torah of Elohim.
It does not subject itself to the Torah of Elohim.
Neither indeed is it able.
Neither indeed is it able.
And those who are in the flesh are unable to please Elohim.
And those who are in the flesh are unable to please Elohim because they are under the subjection of the master of this world. They are under the subjection of Pharaoh, and they cannot please him. Read.
But you are not in the flesh, but in the Ruach, if indeed the Ruach of Elohim dwells in you. And if anyone does not have the Ruach of Mashiach, this one is not his. And if Mashiach is in you, the body is truly dead on account of crime, but the Ruach is life on account of righteousness. And if the Ruach of him who raised Yahusha from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Mashiach from the dead shall also give life to your mortal bodies through his Ruach dwelling in you. So then, brothers, we are not debtors to the flesh to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you are going to die. But if by the Ruach you put to death the deed of the body, you shall live. For as many are as led by the Ruach of Elohim, these are the sons of Elohim. For you did not receive the Ruach of bondage again to fear, but you received the Ruach of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. The Ruach himself bears witness with our Ruach that we are children of Elohim. And if children, also heirs, truly heirs of Elohim, and co-heirs with him, if indeed we suffer with him, in order that we also be exalted together.
Barak Yahuwah. Barak Yahuwah. So we are no longer debtors to the flesh. In other words, pay no mind to the flesh. Pay no mind to it. Pay no mind to the flesh. No longer pay any mind to the flesh, but walk holy in the Ruach. He has given us a down payment to where we no longer have to pay any mind to the flesh. We did not receive a Ruach to remain in bondage. The bondage of what? The bondage of the flesh, the bondage of Egypt. But we receive a Ruach of freedom, whereby which we may cry, Abba, Father. And so we must not pay any mind to the flesh. I know everybody on here has given heed to your flesh. You have paid mind to it. You have paid mind to it. It may have caused you to feel guilt. It may have caused you to feel condemnation, even if you have not transgressed Torah, because you're wondering why you have these thoughts. You're wondering why you still have these thoughts in your flesh, because the flesh still belongs to Hashatan. Pay no mind to it. Rebuke it, ignore it, walk holy in a Ruach in accordance with his righteous Torah. Barak Yahuwah, read.
We got Galatians 5, 16 to 26.
Galatians chapter 5. Galatians chapter 5, verses 16 through 26. 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 Beginning at verse 16, we read here.
And I say, walk in the Ruach.
Walk in the Ruach.
And you shall not accomplish the lust of the flesh.
And you shall not accomplish the lust of the flesh. Because walking in the Ruach, this is what? The mind of the Ruach. If you have the mind of the Ruach and you follow the mind of the Ruach, you shall not accomplish the lust of the flesh. That does not mean that it's not going to continue talking to you. Read that again.
I say, walk in the Ruach.
Yes.
And you shall not accomplish the lust of the flesh.
And you shall not accomplish the desires, the lust of the flesh. It's going to lust. It's going to have desires. It's going to speak those lustful thoughts to you. It's going to speak those desires. It's going to speak everything contrary to Torah to cause you to fall into crime. It's going to do it because it has a right to do it. Hashatan has a right to it. He has a right to it. It has a mind of its own. But we must follow the mind of the Ruach. We must overcome this flesh. If we are to be delivered from this flesh, we must overcome it. And the only way to overcome it is to walk in the mind of the Ruach. Read, little one.
For the flesh lusts against the Ruach.
Yes.
And the Ruach against the flesh.
Yes.
And these are opposed to each other.
Yes.
So that you do not do what you desire to do. But if you are led by the Ruach, you are not under Torah. And the works
you
of
are
the
not
flesh,
under condemnation is what this means. Read.
And the works of the flesh are well known, which are these:
Read.
adultery,
Yes.
whoring,
Yes.
uncleanness,
Yes.
indecency,
Yes.
idolatry,
Yes.
drug sorcery,
Yes.
hatred,
Yes.
quarrels,
Yes.
jealousy,
Yes.
fits of rage,
Mhm.
selfish ambition,
Yes.
dissensions,
Yes.
factions,
Yes.
envy,
Yes.
murders,
Yes.
drunkenness,
Yes.
wild parties,
Mhm.
and the like, of which I forewarn you, even as I also said before, that those who practice such as these shall not inherit the reign of Elohim.
Mm-hmm.
But the fruit of the root
But
is
the
love,
fruit of the root, in other words, now it's saying that this is the fruit of the root, but this is the mind of the root. Listen, this is the mind of the root, which opposes the mind of the flesh. What is the mind of the root? Which, in other words, is the fruit of the root.
But the fruit of the root is love,
Love,
joy,
joy.
shalom.
Listen. If you don't have gladness, if you don't have shalom, that means that you are in your flesh. That Hashatan has been successful. He has been successful. He got you in your flesh now. He has you in your flesh. Because if you have the mind of the root, you have what? Love, joy, and shalom. I don't know about you, but I'm at the place where I'm not giving my shalom to anyone. I'm not giving it away. What Yahuwah has shown us is that as long as we are walking in the mind of the Ruach, that we have shalom. It's usually when matters from outside of here. Hashatan sends matters from outside. He sends assassins and he sends arrows to what? To cause us to focus on the affliction. To cause us to focus on the flesh. And whenever we focus on the flesh, whenever we walk in the mind of the flesh, there is no shalom. Oh, you don't understand. There is no shalom in Egypt. Hashatan is a hard taskmaster. Yes, he is. There is no rest. Shalom means rest. There is no shalom in Egypt. He is our heart's taskmaster. And so whenever we follow the mind of the flesh, there is no shalom. There is no joy. There is no love. Because we're walking and operating in the mind of the flesh. What's the rest of it, little one?
Patience.
Patience. You can't have patience in the flesh. You can't have it. And Hashatan wants us to operate in this. He wants us to remain in Egypt, even though the Dom has delivered us from Egypt, so that we can what? So that we can be impatient. Read.
Kindness.
Kindness. You can't be kind in the flesh. It's not real. It's not real kindness. Read.
Goodness.
Goodness.
Trustworthiness.
Trustworthiness.
Gentleness.
Gentleness.
Self-control.
Self-control. Oh, that's a big one. Self-control. No, see, your flesh has no self-control. See, your flesh, when you get those thoughts of masturbation, when you get those thoughts of promiscuity, see, your flesh has no self-control. It will go headlong into masturbation, into sexual promiscuity. It will give itself what it wants. But if you're walking in the mind of the Ruach, you will either ignore those thoughts or rebuke them. The only way for you and I to have shalom and to have self-control is to operate in the mind of the Ruach that he's given us and to understand that there are two dynamics at play. There is a literal mind of the flesh and there is a literal mind of the Ruach. And the mind of the flesh is not going to stop. It's not going to cease. Speaking those lustful desires, speaking those lustful thoughts, speaking thoughts that are contrary to Torah to you. You've got to understand that. And you've got to understand that it has a legal right to do so. And you must choose to operate in the Ruach if you are to have self-control, if you are to overcome, if you are to have shalom. Read, little one.
Against such there is no Torah.
Against such there is no Torah. Against such there is no condemnation. Barak Yahu.
And those who are of Mashiach have impaled the flesh with its passions and the desire. If we live in the root, let us also walk in the root.
Yes.
Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another.
Barak Yahu. Barak Yahu. Barak Yahu. Barak Yahu. The two minds of men. The two minds of men. You want shalom? Even in the affliction, keep the mind of the Ruach. Keep the mind of the Ruach and ignore the mind of the flesh. They're two separate minds. They are two separate minds. Ignore the thoughts or rebuke them. Barak Yahuwah. Read, little one.
We got 1 Corinthians, the second chapter, the whole chapter.
1 Corinthians, the second chapter. We're going to read the entire chapter, and we're almost done. 1 Corinthians, the second chapter. First Corinthians, the second chapter, beginning at verse 1, we read.
And when I came to you, brothers, I did not come with excellence of speech or wisdom, proclaiming to you the witness of Elohim. For I resolved not to know any matter among you except Yahushua Mashiach and him impaled. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. And my word and my preaching were not with persuasive words of man's wisdom, but in demonstration of the Ruach and of power, in order that your belief should not be in the wisdom of men, but in the power of Elohim. Yet we speak wisdom among those who are perfect, and not the wisdom of this age, nor of the rulers of this age, that are being brought to naught. But we speak the wisdom of Elohim, which was hidden in a secret, and which Elohim ordained before the ages for our esteem, which no one of the rulers of this age knew. For if they had known, they would not have impaled the master of esteem. But as it has been written, eyes have not seen, and ears have not heard, nor have entered into the heart of man what Elohim has prepared for those who love him. But Elohim has revealed them to us through his Ruach. For the Ruach searches all matters, even the depths of Elohim.
Yes.
For who among men knows the thoughts of a man?
Who among men knows the thoughts of a man or the mind of a man? Read.
Except the Ruach of a man
Except
that is in him.
Uh-huh.
So also the thoughts of Elohim no one has known except the Ruach of Elohim.
Yes.
And we have received not the Ruach of the world, but the Ruach that is from Elohim, in order to know what Elohim has favorably given us.
Yes.
Which we also speak not in words which man's wisdom teaches, but which the Kadosh Ruach teaches, comparing spiritual matters with spiritual matters. But the natural man does not receive the matters of the Ruach of Elohim, for they are foolishness to him, and he is unable to know them because they are Ruach-like discerned. But he who is spiritual discerns indeed all matters, but he himself is discerned by no one. For who has known the mind of Yahuwah?
Yes.
Who shall instruct him?
Yes.
But we have the mind of Mashiach.
But we have the mind of Mashiach. And this is how he delivers us from the mind of the flesh. This is how he delivers us from Egypt. He gives us his Ruach. He gives us his mind. And thus now, because we are being delivered from the flesh, there are two minds at play. There is the mind of Yahuwah, which is the mind of the Ruach, and there is the mind of the flesh, which Hashatan is the master of. We are indeed, and she's getting ready to read this, we are servants of whomever we obey. Whomever we obey is our master. But we are under no more obligation to be under the authority. Hashatan has no more legal right to be our master. He has a legal right to this flesh, but we are under no obligation to obey it. We are under no obligation to obey it. But you need to understand he has a legal right to it. And he can still speak to it. He can still tempt it. You're going to still get those thoughts. But you must operate in the mind of the Ruach and ignore the mind of the flesh. Either ignore it. If you can't ignore it, just outright rebuke it. Even if you're out in public. If you're getting these thoughts, if you can't ignore them, rebuke it in public. That's okay. They may think that you've lost your mind, but we have lost our minds. Yes, we have. We've lost our minds, our fleshly mind, and put on the mind of the Hamashiach, and put on the mind of Yahuwah. The two minds of men. You must understand that there are two minds, two dynamics at play. Read, little one.
Philippians 2, 1 through 12.
Philippians 2, 1 through 12. Philippians 2, 1 through 12. I think we may have, what, about two more precepts, little one?
Let's see. 3.
3 precepts left, Barak Yahuwah.
After this one.
3 precepts left after this, and we're done. Barak Yahuwah. Philippians 2, verses 1 through 12. Philippians 2, verses 1 through 12. Beginning at verse 1, read.
If then there is any encouragement in Mashiach,
Yes.
if any comfort of love,
Yes.
if any fellowship of Ruach,
Yes.
if any affection and compassion,
Yes.
make my joy complete by being of the same mind,
Of being of the same mind.
having the same love,
Uh-huh.
one in being and of purpose,
Yes.
doing none at all through selfishness
Uh-huh.
or self-conceit,
Yes.
but in humility,
Yes.
consider others better than yourself.
But in humility, consider others better than yourself, irrespective of what you're going through, irrespective of the affliction. We must operate in the mind of the Spirit. We must operate in the mind of the Ruach. We must operate in the mind of Yahuwah and pay no mind to the mind of the flesh. What is the mind of the Ruach? Read.
Each one should look not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others.
Yes.
For let this mind be in you.
For let this mind be in you, the mind of the Ruach. Let this mind be in you, irrespective. Listen, it is written that Mashiach was acquainted with affliction. He was acquainted with sickness, but he yet still considered others better than himself. This is Yahuwah in flesh. And we must have this same mind, the mind of the Ruach, irrespective of what we're going through. And if we have the mind of the Ruach, in accordance with Galatians 5, we can have love, joy, and shalom. We can have our gentleness and patience and kindness and goodness. We can be trustworthy. We can have all of this if we're walking in the mind of the Ruach and ignoring the mind of the flesh. Read.
For let this mind be in you.
For let this mind be in you,
which was also in Mashiach
which was
Yahusha,
also in Mashiach Yahusha,
who being in the form of Elohim,
who being in the form of Elohim,
did not regard equality with Elohim,
did not regard equality with
a
Elohim,
matter to be grasped,
a matter to be grasped,
but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, and came to be in the likeness of men,
and
having been found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death.
The mind of the Ruach, and he humbled himself even unto death on the stake. Read.
Death even of a stake.
Mm-hmm.
Elohim therefore has highly exalted him.
Oh, you want to be exalted, do you? He will exalt us. If we adopt the mind of the Ruach and operate as meek and humble servants, putting others before ourselves, irrespective of what we're going through, operating in shalom, because if you're operating in the mind of the Ruach, you cannot help but operate in shalom. And if we operate this way in the mind of the Ruach, ignoring the mind of the flesh, understanding that these are two dynamics, understanding that the flesh has a mind of its own, and that Hashatan is its master, that he is the master, that he is Pharaoh of Egypt, and the flesh is Egypt, and he has a legal right to it. Understanding this dynamic and putting it under the sole of your feet, and being determined to operate in the mind of the Ruach, we will be exalted. Read, little one.
And giving him the name which is above every name.
Yes.
That at the name of Yahusha, every knee shall bow of those in heaven, and of those on the earth, and of those under the earth. And every tongue should confess that Yahusha, Mashiach, is master to the esteem of Elohim the Father.
Barak
so
Yahuwah.
that, my beloved, as you always obey, not only in my presence, but how much more rather in my absence, work out your own deliverance with reverence and trembling.
With reverence and trembling. The only way we can work out our own deliverance with reverence and trembling is to walk in the mind of the Ruach and to ignore the mind of the flesh. If we do this exaltation that he's talking about here, Yahusha came as us. He came as his son. He only has one son, one firstborn son. It can only be one firstborn son, and that is us. He came as us. So this exaltation that he speaks of here, this is us. This is us. But we must what? Walk as he walked, having the same mind, which is the mind of the Ruach, understanding the dynamic and ignoring or rebuking the mind of the flesh, which Hashatan is still master over. Read, little one.
We got Romans 13, 11 through 14.
Romans chapter 13, verse 11 through 14. Romans chapter 13, verses 11 through 14.
The NASB.
The two minds of men. The two minds of men. Separate and distinct minds of men. Now again, the disclaimer is this. If you have not been born from above, you do not have the mind of the Ruach. You do not have it. And you are no doubt giving into the mind of the flesh. If you do have the mind of the Ruach, if you have been born from above, and you're still giving in to the mind of the flesh, then you are spitting in his face. You are trampling on his grave. You are rejecting the gift of the Ruach, the promise of the Ruach. You are rejecting it if you are refusing to walk in him. If you're refusing to walk in the mind of the Ruach in lieu of walking in the mind of the spirit, in the mind of the flesh, you are rejecting the gift that Yahuwah has given us. You are rejecting the gift that Yahusha shed his dam to send to us. Romans chapter 13, verse 11 through 14, beginning at verse 11, read.
Do this, knowing the time, that it is already the hour for you to awaken from sleep.
Yes.
For now salvation is nearer to us than when we believe.
Yes.
The night is almost gone.
Night is almost gone.
And the day is near.
The day is near.
Therefore, let us lay aside the deeds of darkness.
Lay aside the deeds of darkness.
And put on the armor of light.
And put on the armor of light.
Let us behave properly.
Yes.
As in the day, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual promiscuity and sensuality, not in strife and jealousy, but put on the Master Yahushua HaMashiach, and make no provisions for the flesh in regards to its lust.
And make no provisions for the flesh in regards to its lust. In other words, what he is saying, in other translations, it would tell you to what? Pay no mind to the flesh. It has a mind of its own. Pay no mind to it. Pay no mind, pay no mind, pay no mind to the flesh. Stay in the Ruach. Stay in the mind of the Ruach. And pay no mind to the flesh. Read, little one.
Romans 6, 15 to 16.
Romans 6, verses 15 through 16. Romans 6, verses 15 through 16. Read.
What then? Shall we commit crime because we are not under Torah but under favor? Let it not be. Do you not know that to whom you present yourselves servants for obedience,
Yes.
you are servants of the one whom you obey,
Yes.
whether of crime to death or of obedience to righteousness?
Barak Yahuwah. Barak Yahuwah. Hashatan is the master of the flesh. He owns it. He legally purchased it from Adam. It is legally his. If we operate in accordance with the mind of the flesh, he is your master. He is your master. If you operate in accordance with the mind of the Ruach, Yahushua, Yahuwah is your master. If we operate, if we give in to those thoughts, which are not going to stop because he has a legal right to send them, that will lead to death. If we follow the mind of the Ruach, which is righteousness and shalom, it will lead to life. The two minds of men. There are two minds at play. You must understand this. You must understand the duality. You must understand this dynamic. You must understand it. We must overcome it. And we must either ignore the thoughts of the flesh or rebuke them. Barak Yahuwah. Are there any more precepts?
One more. Philippians 4, 8 through 9.
Philippians 4, 8 through 9. Philippians 4, 8 through 9. Philippians 4, 8 through 9. Here's what Sha'al tells us to do, because he understands. If you don't understand by now, he's been showing us this duality, the mind of the flesh and the mind of the Ruach. He understood all too well. Here's what he tells us to do. Here's a tool. I hate to say tool because this is not a presentation, but here's something that we can use in order to stay in the mind of the Ruach. Here's something that we can use. Philippians 4,
8 through 9.
Verses 8 through 9. What does it say, little one?
For the rest, brothers, whatever is true.
For the rest, brothers, whatever is true.
Whatever is noble.
Whatever is noble.
Whatever is righteous.
Whatever is righteous.
Whatever is clean.
Whatever is clean.
Whatever is lovely.
Whatever is lovely.
Whatever is of good report.
Whatever is of good report.
If there is any uprightness,
if there is any uprightness,
and if there is any praise,
if there is any praise,
think on these.
think on these.
And what you have learned and received,
And what you have learned and received,
and heard and saw in me,
and heard and saw in me,
practice these,
practice these.
and the Elohim of Shalom shall be with you.
And the Elohim of Shalom will be with you. Listen. And the Elohim of Shalom will be with you. Why? Because this is the mind of the Ruach. And where the mind of the Ruach is, there's the fruit of the Ruach, and there is Shalom. He will be with you. He is Shalom. Yahuwah Shalom. He is Shalom. If we focus on these things, if we stay in the mind of the Ruach, the Elohim of Shalom will be with us, and we will have Shalom irrespective of what we're going through, irrespective of the afflictions of the flesh, irrespective of the temptations of the flesh, irrespective of the continual voices, the continual nagging of the flesh. If we focus on these things and ignore the flesh or rebuke it, we will have Shalom. I pray that this has encouraged someone here on YouTube. I pray that someone who has been struggling with this, who has been condemning themselves, who has been feeling guilty because you continue to have these thoughts, understand that Hashatan has a legal right to continue to send these thoughts. He has a legal right to do so. And these thoughts are going to continue until we are what? Completely delivered from the flesh. And the first fruits of the first fruits, the remnant within the remnant, will be the first to be completely delivered from the flesh and who will wholly walk in Ruach. I pray that this has encouraged you. I pray that this has edified you. I pray that this has strengthened you. Until we meet again, those of you on YouTube, Yahuwah barak you and guard you. Yahuwah make his face shine upon you and show favor unto you. Yahuwah lift up his face upon you and give you shalom. Thus you shall put my name on the children of Yasha'al, and I myself shall barak them. So be it, so be it, so be it.